Hello, hello, everyone.
Hello.
We are back and restreaming with all of us in a single chat, all of us on a single stream in Substack, and I don't have to follow multiple streams anymore to find all of you in one great place. And it's going to be so much easier for everyone to be able to subscribe to all of the network and our contribute, both myself and Ellie Leonard today. Welcome, Ellie. It is Banner
Hi.
and Backbone presenting powerful voices, and today I wanted to bring back co host Ellie Leonard to discuss some money and some financial ties going on, but also some important things that she's been digging into and finding in the latest Epstein releases, all of the depositions, and how we work together to get these powerful voices out there and hold these powerful men mostly accountable. So, welcome, Ellie. How are you today?
I'm great. How are you doing?
Oh, busy, busy. Just
Yeah,
got off an interview with Rick Herbst
very
and
good.
Lisa. Um, I forget her full tag,
Yeah,
but it was so much fun to get to
yeah.
talk to them. Um,
I'm
how
trying
are
we're
you?
trying to Rick and I are trying to figure out when we can chat this week. It could be today, it could be another day. I don't know because we're just trying to figure out schedules. But yeah, we'll be chatting soon for sure.
Good. And this is kind of awesome too, because we're sorry everybody for the restart of the stream there. Trying something a little new. So we're on restream, but if you notice, we're all together now, where it says Banner Backbone, Ellie Leonard, and Nick Perro together in a single live. Um, is it looked like Substack did a small update for us that helps us group together our restream into a single channel. I'm not sure how it's going to impact our viewers overall, things like that, but we're going to try it.
Yeah, give it a shot.
Give it a shot, see how it goes. And so hopefully y'all enjoy it today. Hopefully you guys enjoy the show. Um, and so, Ellie, I'm going to really hand it over to you
Oh dear.
to go into stuff. But the
Okay.
first, we're going to shift to our next screen, which is actually where we're going to show some QR codes for everybody. So if you are on a computer, um, and you want to support, this is initially we're going to show our QR code for Banner and Backbone. Please become a supporter of the network. It helps us grow and sustain. Today, we hit bestseller status for Banner and Backbone with 100 paid subscribers. So, everyone who's so far contributed, thank you so much for helping us put this network together so that we can elevate voices like Ellie's and everybody and all the work that she's doing and finding out so that we can get some accountability. So, Ellie, I'm going to put on the screen is the predatory victims,
Sure.
Epstein's accomplices first. And I'd love for you to dig in for us on some of the newest stuff that you've been finding and what we can help expose.
So I think I surprised myself, not in like a great way, but just like how intensely. I really love data and just the really nitty gritty of some of this more analytical side of the Epstein story, the Trump administration, not these bigger umbrellas of these kind of breaking news stories, but the really underground stuff that we have publicly, but is sort of, it's kind of like shadow banning when you post things on social media, where you post things but nobody sees it. There are things that have been given to us but nobody sees it, nobody hears about it because there's intent behind that. And so I've spent the week just gathering depositions, any deposition that is available publicly. I have depositions from multiple Trump trials. I've got the E. Jean Carroll depositions. I've got all the paperwork from the court case in the 1970s when he and his father were not allowing people of color to move into their apartment buildings, and they were, brought to trial. Like hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents that, you know, I would love to sit down and go through. I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm keeping it just with the hopes that I'm going to have time to go through it, because what I'm finding Um, what I'm finding in these documents that are available to everybody is if you sit back and you wait for the world to tell you what's in these documents, you're never going to hear. If you go through it, you start to find little morsels that are things that nobody's talking about, either intentionally or because they were not thorough, like people glossed over it. But for example, I finished up typing up all the transcripts for the Ghislaine Maxwell interviews from July with Todd Blanche. And, we were given transcripts. I did not have to type them up, but I am a transcriber by trade. And I know for sure that there's not a lot of us out there who are really, really, really thorough. And that is not to toot my own horn. That is just to say that I am untrustworthy of anyone else's transcribing skills. I want to do it for myself and I want to see what's in there. And so it also helps me to hear what's being said better than if I just read through it. If I'm hearing her voice and I'm listening to everything and I'm typing it up, I'm going to get more detailed information that's going to stick in my brain. And so I did find mistakes. I did find things that they wrote down incorrectly. I did find things that were said in those transcripts that were not supposed to be said. She kind of finishes with a bang. I warn you, I'm gonna I'm gonna do a breakdown of the last section of the second day. Um, she says things that surprised me. Um, anyway, and so I will go through and break that down. But this week, well, last week we had I think it was 6 pages of the deposition, or not deposition, 6 pages from the Epstein files. They give us six whole honking pages, right? Out of hundreds of thousands that they have. But they were rather meaty if you looked at them. There was 2 pages of ledgers, so like financial ins and outs, money coming in, money going out. It's redacted as far as who's paying and who's receiving the funds, but it is thousands of dollars in and out every day. And then you had like 2 lines that were unredacted in these ledgers, and both of them were payments for massages for Prince Andrew, and both of them were $200, which validates everything that every victim has ever said about how much they were being paid to massage people. So two $200 payments. Then you had one flight manifest to the island that included Adam Perry Lang, which was Epstein's personal chef. He went everywhere with him. He is someone who's not been subpoenaed. And you had a couple of names that were redacted, and it's just sloppy work because we have the flight logs and we can match up the manifest with the flight logs and see who those redacted people are. And it was one of Epstein's assistants named Emmy Taylor, which is actually Ghislaine Maxwell's assistant. She has not been subpoenaed. And you had an art dealer was on the plane with them, and they redacted those names, but I could go find them easily in another document. So you had that, and then you had the thing that everybody paid attention to, and that was Epstein's itinerary that said, has Elon Musk responded to my calls? Is he coming to the island? And so you had that, and it was kind of like, for me, it's like a little bit of a yawn because it was him and Peter Thiel, and it's so expected. It doesn't surprise me. I mean, I guess it's validating when we have things like that. No, we don't know if Elon actually went to the island, but it connects him with being invited to the island. I don't expect any sort of moral behavior out of a guy with 14 kids and all different baby mamas and a penis implant, and like I don't accept him to be like this on a moral high horse. So we got all of that, and I went through that and I looked for kind of the nitpicky little things, and then I wrote an article. So I wrote 2 articles this week, but I wrote an article that I called The Predatory Victims because it is a moral dilemma that I have been working through this entire Epstein case. And that is, can a person be a victim and an aggressor? And then if so, on what side of the coin do we fall or do they fall when we talk about charges and when we talk about reputation? Because I would venture to say that most girls who are underage girls, teenage girls who are brought into the fold in these thousands of women over time eventually played some part in the predatory side. Not to say they were doing sexual things, but they played the part of gathering more. They were paid. It was a pyramid scheme. They were paid to go get more girls from this high school in Palm Beach, bring them in, and then they'd be paid $200 for all the girls. Um, that was done as a grooming technique. That was done under threats and fear and poverty, and this is not something that they should be blamed for having done. However, it comes to a point when they stop being children and they move into adulthood, and depending on some of these women who were with him for a decade, when do we start to say, this is past grooming, you're now an adult, you have become an aggressor? And that is a question, because they're still very young. They were adults, but they were still very young and incredibly impressionable, and this is the last several years of their life that they were brought up in this way. Do we hold them accountable, or do we still see them as victims? And so I wrote about four different women, and they were four women. I'll name them first off. So it's Sarah Kellen, Leslie Groff, Adriana Ross, also known as Adriana Musinska, and Nadia Marchenko. They are four women who worked as assistants to Jeffrey Epstein, and they are four women that were given full immunity in his sweetheart deal in 2008. Now, his sweetheart deal was a case when he had 36 women who were underage girls came forward to accuse him of sexual misconduct, of rape, of molestation, of all different levels. 36 women came forward, much like the second time around, and accused him of these things, and it went to trial. He was convicted, but he got something called a sweetheart deal, which is a non-prosecution agreement, which means he agreed to say he was guilty on two lesser charges, and he was given 18 months in jail. He only had to serve 13 of them, and it was not in prison, it was in county lockup. His jail cell was unlocked. He was allowed to leave 12 hours a day to go to his office, to go wherever he needed to, and he hired the jail guards to work in his office for $128,000. And it's likely that during that time he was locked up, even though he was out 12 hours a day, it's likely that there were more victims during that time. And that's something that I think everybody is looking into, because Alexander Acosta, who was on the prosecution side of things, he was not on Epstein's defense team, which Alan Dershowitz was. He's still accountable for having given this very, very lenient deal. And if we find out that there are more victims that were sexually abused during the time when he was supposed to have been in jail, then now the state of Florida can be held. So the reason why I was struggling with this dilemma is most of these women who worked as his assistants were adults. Like, they were adults, but they were like 21. You know what I mean? Very young, brought in that same trajectory of they were down on their luck, came from bad families. Maybe they got married really, really young and they were in abusive relationships. And he took them in and gave them validation, according to them. They felt very validated. They felt like they had self worth. All of a sudden, they had a financial stability. So it's the same story you hear with these underage girls, but now we're dealing with legal adults, which makes a big difference. Um, since since 2019 is a real big kind of deal breaker for a lot of people. People who honored him and glorified him and stood next to him for everything have said that they were victims. It is hard to tell. You have someone like Sarah Kellen. She was probably the closest with him. She was very young, but she was a legal adult. If you look in the birthday book, there are many, many gushing like letters from her about how great he is and what he did for her. And he took us, a divorcee, and gave her value and gave her worth and gave her money. And and it didn't sound like at the time, which was 2003, it didn't sound like she was being very victimized. However, we know that people who are in abusive relationships and abusive situations very often stand and speak on behalf of their predators, right? So at the time, she was very pro Jeffrey Epstein. Since then, she started to claim that she was a victim. Um, I don't know how I feel about that. I think she was victimized, but I think she played such a role in this sex ring with Epstein and Ghislaine. She was very high up. So I struggle with the idea of her being a victim, but I also know that she was groomed, right? If you're groomed,
Hmm.
you can become an aggressor. Leslie Groff, I'll move on to her. She started working in her mid-20s. She was older. She is somebody who I don't really hold a lot of heart for. Um, she didn't she didn't sound like somebody who was victimized. She came from the modeling industry. She worked a lot of these women, if they came on really early in the 90s, they didn't go through the veins that we hear of later of like meeting through the modeling industry or finding them at a massage parlor. It's more
Yeah.
like they came in the traditional route of like hiring an assistant through like a temp agency or something like that. So he was doing like the traditional hiring back then, and she came in like that. Um, he didn't wanna lose her, he claimed, and so when she finally got pregnant, he hired a nanny for her and gave her a Mercedes so that she wouldn't be home with her child, she would still keep working for him because he did not like pregnancy, he did not like
Hmm.
marriage. He was against all convention, um, and now she lives in a $5 million home, so it's like she benefited from a lot of what he did, and she is somebody who's not spoken up since. You have Adriana Musinska, who came in when she was 18. So you're getting younger and younger. Still legally adult in the US. But she came in where she came over from Poland, right? She's one of these more Eastern European girls who came in through modeling, who came in with Jean-Luc Brunel, elite model management, which needs to be investigated, in my opinion. But Jean-Luc Brunel was the other big guy in modeling who was in Epstein's circle, who also was indicted for sex with a minor and sexual abuse, and he also killed himself in a jail cell. And so she came in through that vein and started working as a masseuse. So it's very similar, right, to what we hear with some of these
Yeah.
young girls. Um, However, when his home was raided in the early 2000s for this first trial, she somehow removed all the hard drives and all the computer equipment from the house prior to the house being raided by the FBI. So somebody tipped them off, whether it was through the Palm Beach Police Department or other means, somebody tipped them off that the FBI was going to raid the house, and she removed all the hard drives. So she's very accountable to missing
Yeah.
information. Even so, I believe that she was someone who was groomed. I do believe that she was someone who's victimized. However, because she was 18 when that started, according to documents. Now, I don't know, maybe he met her or knew her earlier than that before she came over. She's someone who very went through that very traditional Epstein method of coming over as a young model from an Eastern European country and
Yeah.
moved into massage and then worked up her way up to being an assistant. And then the last one is the one that I think is the saddest and also the biggest moral dilemma. Nadia Marchenko, she's also called Marchenkova. Um, she came to the US when she was 15. And she
Mhm.
was the one, she came on an Einstein visa. So you think of like Melania Trump came on an Einstein visa, right? She got granted. Um, so that's something that I question. I'm like, how are all these young models coming to the US on Einstein visas? That's something that needs to be investigated. Um, she took off when she got to the US. She took off for a little while, and Epstein was very angry. And he told the other girls he worked with that she did not have the right to take off because he bought her from her father and that
I
she was
remember it. Yeah.
his yeah, she was his sex slave. So she started as a child. Um, he gave her a lot of things. And so she may or may not have had as negative of a view of what was happening to her, despite it being very sexual in nature, despite it probably being a little bit violent in nature. He paid for her to go to flight school. She wanted to go to flight school. And so he paid for her to become a pilot. He paid for her to have a lot of training and various things. And this was all in her mind better than where she came from. She came from Slovakia,
Hmm.
and she felt like she'd gotten the golden ticket, right?
Yeah.
She had a sugar daddy basically. And so she eventually started her own what was it called? So she actually was one of the pilots of his plane who was flying back and forth to the island. She was his pilot, one of them. And then she eventually founded a company called Avaloop, which is an aviation marketing company that's still a company to this day. But it's if you look at the website for this company, the address for the website is listed as 301 East 66th Street. Now, that is the apartment building in New York City owned by Mark Epstein, which is where they housed all these young girls when they came to the US. It's where Ehud Barak stayed. It's where Prince Andrew stayed. It's where a lot of these sexual deviants, these people who are listed in these documents, stayed, and that's the same address. And so that's the address for her company, which is still owned by Mark Epstein to this day, but he claims not to know a thing. So there you go. Um, when in let's see, what year was this? So in 2024, January 2024, the Biden administration released 1,000 pages of the Epstein files. So if anybody tells you they didn't release anything, they release stuff. Now, granted, it's not very much as far as all the information we have, but they released 1,000 pages in early 2024. And when that happened, she disappeared. And that's not to say that something horrible happened to her, but it's more likely she went into hiding when that document was
Yeah.
released because she felt like she was, despite her immunity, was going to be held accountable. She's not wrong. Um, that immunity that those women were given in that case applies only to the state of Florida. If they were re-prosecuted in the state of New York, for example, because they did much of their work in New York City, they are not immune and they could be held accountable. However, nobody has offered, right? Nobody has brought that up.
Hmm.
And so and there's a lot of people that kind of fit under that umbrella where once that case was done in Florida, they thought they were free and in the clear and they can go, but it only applies to Florida. So if somebody wanted to, they could prosecute many people involved with specifically just that case, not even the one from 2019. The one from 2008 is much of what we hear about, like the Katie Johnson stuff and the Ghislaine Maxwell stuff. That's all from that time period. So if someone wanted to, they could prosecute these people, but no one has offered. So that's the first one.
Okay. And I think that's great leading point then where you ended. Obviously, you ended on a great lead in to the next piece is the I was 13 years old, the story of
Hmm.
Katie Johnson.
Yes.
Um, and I'd love for you to talk about that one because there's a lot of questions around this
Hmm.
story. I think this is the one, correct me if I'm wrong, that Michael Cohen was the at the time was Trump's fixer and lawyer,
Hmm.
and he handled this.
Yep.
And so there's questions he around all of this, whether Katie Johnson was a real person,
Hmm.
was some of the questioning, and where the story came from. And so I'd love for you to dig in and give us some information about that because
Sure.
that one sticks in
It's
my mind and is
it's
weird
dark.
to me,
It's
and
very
it's
dark.
dark, and it puts a interesting pin on Michael Cohen, who has been,
Hmm.
for the most part, a really strong advocate against Trump since he left. Um,
Yes.
and so this one makes me nervous in ways because I don't want him to be a part of it, but I do know
Right.
he was in that community protecting people who were part of it.
Yeah.
Um, and knowing the truth is really important.
Right.
So I'll lay it back for you for with that um, walk in on where we are with Katie
Okay.
Johnson previous to your reporting.
Okay. I will say I do not know Michael Cohen. Um, I know when it was brought up that I found that a Jane Doe had been named in the Ghislaine Maxwell interviews, and I noted it. He was not very happy about that. Um, I think he thought that it was Katie Johnson. I don't believe that it was. I believe that that was a different person. But his reaction wasn't very thrilled with me, and I was not bringing it to him. I was just,
Yeah.
I was just writing about it or talking about it, and then somebody else was talking about it in his chat with one of his lives, and he wasn't. I don't think he was very happy with me. But again, that is what it is. Um, I hope that Michael Cohen is on the up and up. I It's going to take me a minute for a lot of these folks who have come from the Trump administration and who flipped because they had consequences, right? Like as you should, like as any person should,
Yeah.
you have consequences for crimes. Um and that made them flip versus flipping before committing those crimes. And nobody's perfect. Everybody makes mistakes. And so I'm not going to hold people to those mistakes. But it does take me time to really see that someone has changed and they're making a commitment to the thing that I'm standing for. Even like let's say when things go back to normal and they calm down, will you still be hanging out with us? That takes time.
Yeah.
Um so as far as the Katie Johnson story, this is one that was extremely dark. I thought that I knew it. And then when I went through and I read all the depositions, because there are several, I first off was like, how do I write this? Like, is it this? Am I even allowed to write this? Like, are there limits to what you're allowed to post on Substack? Because the things that are alleged are incredibly violent and
Yeah.
incredibly sexual in nature, and they involve children. And so I'm not going to go into huge detail here, but I will say trigger warning if anybody's in the audience. I'm going to talk a little bit about it, but I'll try to be more cryptic and gentle with my wording because
And we
it
are streaming on YouTube too, so
yeah,
just in
yeah,
case, like,
yeah,
we'll make sure this is PC enough. But
yes,
yes, be
yeah.
warned,
Just
be forewarned. These conversations will
yeah,
always contain
they're rough,
information about sexual assault and
really, really
abuse
rough.
and
Yeah.
pedophilia. Yeah,
Yeah, so you had this woman named Katie Johnson who came forward in 2016 and talking about something that happened to her when she was 13 years old, right? Very young, younger than most of the stories we hear with Jeffrey Epstein. Um, People often ask why someone doesn't come forward before then. And I think for most of these people who are abused, and even when it's not in the news, when it's just like your uncle or something, you do your best to live your life pretending that it didn't happen or moving on or not dealing or working through therapy and just doing it quietly on your own with your family. And you don't want to come forward and make a big announcement of a horrible thing that happened to you. And I don't think anybody wants to say that out loud. Um, but when you can ignore the person that did it to you for a long period of time, and then all of a sudden they're everywhere, like they're on every
yeah,
TV station, they're on every poster and the radio and the news, and they're just you can't turn them off. That trauma starts to re-traumatize you. And you also, for a lot of women, like I think of Christine Blasey Ford, who came forward and had testimony against Brett Kavanaugh about the things that he did to her in high school.
yeah.
A lot of these women,
That
because
should
they're
have
older,
buried him too. Like,
it should
just
all
that
this. I
act should
mean,
have buried him.
yes, she's incredibly reliable. I've listened to her a lot off the record through my work. She's a very decent human being with a lot of integrity, and she's very shy and quiet and never wanted to be here. ever in a million years.
And it takes
Um,
so much bravery to go
it
do
does.
that and
It does.
relive your trauma over and over again,
And
because that's
and
what it
to know what the
is.
backlash will be. That's the hard thing, is you know what the backlash is gonna be when you go up against someone who's in a very powerful role, is you're gonna get crushed. But,
Yeah.
for a lot of these women, and mind you, she didn't make a penny off that. She wasn't suing him. She didn't make any money coming forward. That was not her intent. Um, but when you a lot of these women who are now older and they have children of their own, and they start to see the forest for all the trees. When you see this person come on and you're feeling re-traumatized, all of a sudden you feel like you need to do something or say something, because they cannot get away with this again. And when
Yeah.
somebody's doing this, you know that you're not the first person, you're not the last person. So in the case of Katie Johnson, when Trump started running for president, she came forward. She was represented by Gloria Allred's daughter, and her name is escaping me right now, represented by a very big civil rights attorney. The case was taken extremely seriously. Um,
Lisa
and
Bloom.
Lisa Bloom, thank you. Um, and she came forward and she alleged, because we always have to say alleged, that not only was it Jeffrey Epstein, but it was Donald Trump. And these similar characteristics have been brought up by people like Maria Farmer, um, that he was absolutely in Epstein's wheelhouse. He was absolutely asking about underage girls. He was absolutely very sexualized. And so it was this very graphic story about him not only abusing Katie on four different occasions, but also another girl with a pseudonym, I think Marie. I want to say Marie, who was 12. So they're 13 and 12-year-old girls. Not only are they being sexually abused, but after the fact, they're being physically abused. And it's like
Mhm.
it's like a tag team, because Epstein and Trump are both there. And they're asking them, both of them are asking them to do things, and then when they're done doing these things, they're being berated for not having done them well enough. They're being punched and slapped in the face. They are being tied down to the bed frame. I mean, these are very little girls. Um, this happened on four occasions. I think on the third one was when the little girl Marie was with her, and then she never saw that little girl in the house again. And then there was one time when Donald Trump said something like, "If you ever say anything," so he's saying this to Katie, "then you will disappear just like she did." And she didn't know if she was fine. Like, maybe that was just an empty threat, but she'd never seen her again. And as a 13-year-old girl, that really, really scared her. Obviously, she thought that he had killed this little girl. She didn't know, but
Well,
that's a
yeah,
really
well,
big.
if an old man comes
Yeah.
and tells you, "Hey, I'm going to kill you," or
Hmm.
"You're going to disappear like this other person,"
Right.
any child is, I mean, any child would be afraid.
Yeah.
Most adults will be afraid of
Right.
somebody like
Right.
that, because that's a predator. That's a violent
Right.
individual.
And I mean, she's old enough to know about sex. And at one point, she's crying because she's like, "I don't want to get pregnant. You're not, you at least use protection or do something." And Donald Trump is opening his wallet and throwing cash at her, and he's saying, "Get a fucking abortion then. Like, here's money, get a fucking abortion." You know what I mean? Like, it was very violent. It was very angry. And then it's like, then the two older men are fighting with each other, because Epstein is mad because he's known this little girl for a while, and he's mad that Trump took her virginity. And then Trump's making like Jewish slurs at Epstein, like they're fighting. Like, it's just this big kind of chaotic scene that happened on multiple occasions at these parties at the house. And then, so she came forward and then she says these things. And then there's this woman who's a pseudonym, who's Tiffany Doe. And she's more like these women who were a Sarah Kellen. She's like 25, 24, young woman working for Epstein on the as like a masseuse, but a little bit older, legal adult kind of a thing. She could be held accountable for her role, um, because she was there doing these things that she was asked. She was groomed. She did them for years, like a lot of these girls did. But she came forward as a witness for Katie Johnson, and validated every single thing, like to the T, every single thing that she said. She's like, I saw all of this. Um, he did tie them to the bed. Yes, he did say that about the little girl that she disappeared. Like she validated everything. So she became the main witness in this case, and all of it was being brought forward. And there was a point when there was going to be a press conference, and this Katie Johnson, which is a pseudonym, was going to come forward and reveal her identity because this had been in the news. It was a big deal. And she was willing to validate her case by, giving away her identity. And 4 days before the election, she pulled out of everything. It's like 4 days before the presidential election. She's like, I can't, I'm not gonna do it. She shocked her lawyers and they said, are you sure? And she says, I can't go through with this. I'm pulling the case, I'm pulling the identity, I'm terrified. And she was getting death threats on her phone. And she was terrified. And then she completely disappeared off the map. And she exists somewhere. I don't think that something horrible happened to her, but I think she was being threatened very, very badly in this case, enough that she jumped ship. I don't think it didn't feel like something that was incredible. It felt very credible. The story felt very credible. The legal team felt very credible. Their reaction to her canceling everything made it feel more credible because it was just such a surprise. They were just, I mean, they had so much. And then since then, nobody knows who she is, where she is. She just completely went into hiding. Um, there has been a video testimony released, and I've included it in a lot of my articles, a couple of my articles. It's the full video testimony of Katie Johnson. There are interesting takeaways. She's wearing a wig. Some of them show her face, which I find interesting. Some of them have it blurred out. She sounds very young for being an adult. She sounds very young and very immature. That doesn't surprise me if somebody was being sexually abused at 13 years old. Um, Inevitably, those were not the only people sexually abusing her. But when she was willing to come into a home and be sexually abused because she was being fed and making a wage, and chances are this is happening to her somewhere else. So it doesn't surprise me that she sounds young and immature even as an adult, because that really stunts you. That really kind of stops you in your path. Um, there is, there are stories behind how the media got that video because that was supposed to be a private deposition video, that there's blackmail among like tabloids who got a hold of it or that they maybe created it themselves. There's not a lot of clarity where that video came from. But I do believe that that is the person who brought the charges forward. But it's such a complicated case, and it is the darkest case because it's the most detailed evidence that we have in these sex crimes that we have. I'm sure the FBI has more than we have, um, but it's the darkest piece of information that we have that involves Donald Trump as well. And when you can dismiss it as hearsay and she gave up and she didn't follow through, but then you have the case of E. Jean Carroll where he was absolutely convicted and has to pay her $83 million. So it's not something he's incapable of doing. He had a lot of money and power, and he had, again, his wife came over from Slovenia. She came over on an Einstein visa. Like there's a lot of these patterns that you just see over and over and over again that are very similar between the two men, to where that this is not something that's unbelievable if you're willing to believe information, right? I'm sure there's a lot of people in his wheelhouse that will not believe this, because they
Yeah.
just, you know, they're going to believe what they want to believe. But this is a person who, if she came forward again, now it's been what, 9 years, um, would be a very interesting discussion. 9 years in retrospect of this administration and what she would have to say. So yeah.
Yeah. So this one's a really interesting one too, because like you said, it's the most detailed it sort of disappeared right before or it didn't sort of, it just disappeared right before the election.
Yeah.
Um, and it was confirmed information too, it sounds
Yeah.
like.
I mean,
Um,
it was believed. You know,
or believed information, yeah.
when you get someone like Lisa Bloom in there, who is a huge civil rights attorney, that means there was credible evidence in this case that she took on the case. That's a great indicator that it was a credible case.
Yeah. Um, and so like, can we dig in a little bit
Mhm.
more around the idea of the modeling agencies in this part,
Yeah.
or even like the, not the Epstein, the, I guess, Epstein Einstein visa, the Epstein
Mhm.
visa that was going on, because it sounds like they were using this visa that isn't applicable to them. We saw it
Mhm.
happen with Melania Trump, um, to cover for Epstein related style human
Mhm.
trafficking.
Yeah.
And I don't want to keep blaming Epstein alone, but that's the easiest
There's a lot
pseudonym
of
to
people.
use because
Yeah.
it's so much more than that. And I think that's what we're like, hopefully, all of this is
Mhm.
revealing is like,
Yeah.
there's so much more than Epstein.
Right.
And so I know you've started at least a little bit into it, but like
Mhm.
what what is the best thing that could help you um get the most information that you could out of things like this in terms of like subpoenas, or how do you see us as say Banner and Backbone and a group working to support getting more of this information out, and actually collecting it in the first place.
I think a big thing is whatever public information there is, and it may require like a FOIA, Freedom of Information Act request, but like finding all the names of all the piddly little businesses that all these people had under their names. Because from what it seems, anytime Epstein moved into a new house, he would buy the house under a business name that was named after the address of a house. So it was like he was creating all these businesses in order to do some sort of financial interaction, whether that was to get a free house like Leslie Wexner's house, or like to buy an island, or to get an airplane from somebody. He would create a business and the business would buy the airplane, and it would be a business created just for that transaction. So you know there's something shady financial there when somebody's doing that. Um I wrote an article called it was about a restaurant in New York called Cipriani's. It's an
Mhm.
Italian restaurant. It has huge mob ties to the Genovese crime families, Gambino crime families. I called it the House of a Thousand Epsteins, because it was this club of people like Harvey Weinstein and Jeffrey Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel and um, these these folks that are all in the same realm of sexual abuse, which did occur. I mean, it occurred on the stairs in the restaurant back by the kitchen. Like it literally occurred on the grounds of that restaurant, allegedly. Um, but they're all in this kind of same world. And so when you think of all these little businesses that they were running, a lot of them were little modeling businesses. Did they have models? No. They just created a modeling business and then they started bringing girls in and saying, "Look, I have a modeling business." Um, and so something that I really want to dig into, and Zev Shalev has chatted with me a bit about this, is all the ties of the modeling industry, from the very smallest fake business name all the way up to like an elite model management, right? Because they were bringing, I mean, you think of like when you used to watch Top Model. I don't know if you ever did. I used to watch
Mhm.
Top Model. I mean, these girls are definitely not 18-year-old girls. They're young.
Yeah.
And you're bringing in girls, especially from these quintessential white, the idea of the white beautiful woman is this Eastern European woman. It's tall, beautiful, thin, great bone structure, pouring women in, girls in from these countries into the US, to either these modeling agencies that are, quote unquote credible, versus someone like an Epstein. making his own modeling agency, Donald Trump making his own modeling agency and bringing girls into the US who never run a never walk a catwalk, right?
Mhm.
Um and so you have all these girls. Hold on, I want to make sure my computer's not dying. Okay, we're good. You have all these girls coming through these modeling agencies, being promised a lot of things, and so their parents are saying, "Yeah, sure, go," and are often being. I mean, they're not in so many words being purchased from their parents, but their parents are probably offered a decent amount of money for these girls to come to the US, right? And then you have to look at something like an Einstein visa and say, if I'm starting to hear more than one story of young models coming to the US on an Einstein visa to somebody who's one of these billionaires who owns a modeling agency, who inside the system is administering these Einstein visas? And where does that story go? Because they can't just get them all on their own. They have to be talking to
Yeah.
someone who can approve these Einstein visas. So who on the inside is approving all this stuff? Because technically, you can get an Einstein visa not based on the talent or skills or history of the person, but based on the person signing away your name. So if you have someone on there who has prestige, like a Donald Trump, they can get you an Einstein visa even if you've done nothing and you're just coming to the US to start to do something for the very first time. So it's a pretty corrupt system that inevitably played a huge role in sex trafficking. If you think it only applies to the person signing on the dotted line and not the person being brought in, that's a huge opening for a sex trafficking business. Like nobody's talking about that. Nobody is trying to fix that, and it is
Mhm.
all linked with the modeling industry. So that's something that, again, with a little time and patience, I would like to sit down and just start to pick apart, because I think if we can find a list, like even just make a list of all the people and all the modeling agencies, and then try to figure out who came to the US under these specific modeling agencies or who was linked to them, and start to, this is what I like to do, very analytical, start to
Mhm.
find this giant web of billionaires, people in power and models and ages and how they're all linked and who came here on an Einstein visa. I think that's a big story. And I think that's the kind of thing that we have now without being given the Epstein files, that we have
Yeah.
now, that's a really big deal that we have access to. And yeah, so that's something that if I could sit dawn till dusk and work on, that would be what it would, that would be it.
That would be awesome if we
Yeah.
could find a way to organize and figure that out.
Yeah.
There's been some great questions in the chat and information too, and I want to bring one up because it ties really, really tightly into this, from our friend Little LT, is Erica Kirk, and
Hmm.
her organization that does basically human trafficking from Eastern Europe through streets, foster systems, and orphanages. Um, and she was a model linked directly
Hmm.
to Donald Trump, at one point, I believe. And she was part of some of this, not maybe not directly through any of that,
Hmm.
the Epstein side of it and the pedophilia side, but she is in this world and that organization and
Hmm.
funneling people from Eastern Europe to America through these fake um Epstein visas or
Hmm.
mail order brides and things like that. Like I grew up hearing about mail order brides. We
Yeah.
all we all
Yeah.
did. Like, oh, buy this bride from, if you can't find a wife, buy a wife from Eastern Europe.
Yeah, they have
Well,
reality shows about it.
those mail order brides, I think, are children more often than
Yeah.
not. And if they're not children when you get them, they were stolen children at one point.
Yeah.
Like, that's the only thing that makes sense to me now on that.
Yeah,
And
a
looking at
lot
the
of
modeling industry, how that fits in.
well, a lot of these girls who come to the US, if they are legal adults, there's two things. Um, that this was not the first point in their story, right? They started into a system wherever they came from. They started into a system very early. A lot of them, like you'll hear with Melania, she went to like an arts boarding school where she started to learn photography and then modeling. And it's and maybe that's on the up and up. Maybe it was just an arts boarding school, and it was fine, but it's just all linked. Like all these things are linked to these models coming over. So that's the first thing. The second thing is a lot of these countries that they send girls over do not have the same age of consent as the US. They do not have the same concept of marrying someone similar to your age. They do have a lot of familiarity with older men marrying much, much, much younger women, very often girls. And so when you come to the US, they don't know what US laws. And so when they're being offered up to an older man, like it can feel like an arranged marriage, and it can feel very familiar and not scary to them, or that it's something that they're supposed to do because that's the way they've been raised. These men know this. They know that they can get away more with girls from countries that don't have the same age of consent as the US, and they take advantage of that. And that's probably a lot simpler for them to get them to the US than it is to find girls on the street in the US who are raised in the system here, but that's just me
Yeah.
surmising.
Yeah, because I think we track our system a little more closely, even though I think our adoption system is also very broken and exposed to human trafficking
Mhm,
and abuse. Family court is apparently one of the most awful places because it leaves open places for abuse and people being stuck in homes that they are unsafe in.
mhm,
Um, and I think it all does sort of tie in with each other in a lot of ways because of these things. Um, and so um, to ensure that we keep ourselves on time, we're going to wrap up our discussion today so that we don't bleed over too late for Ellie or
thank
for
you.
myself. We've got stuff, both of us have stuff we've got to take care of today. Um, but this has also been really, really important. We're going to continue our discussions into this, especially around the modeling agency. I
Mhm,
want to continue to talk with Ellie and Zev around that and get both of you guys really reporting on it and exposing everything that's going on because freedom of information is what we've got and it's our superpower and we can collectively act to do it. So before we go, Ellie, where can people find you? How can
sure.
they support your work independently outside of Banner and Backbone?
Yeah, so I'm on Substack as the Panicked Unpaid Writer, or you can look me up as just Ellie Leonard. I don't know how many Ellie Leonards there are on Substack, but I don't think there's a lot. And then if you want to find me anywhere else on social media, I'm under my work name, which is Red Pencil Script, just how it sounds, Red Pencil Script. And I'm on most social media platforms. I'm even on TikTok if you dare. So yeah.
If you dare. I wouldn't dare.
I know it's really lame.
Sometimes I don't dare. I go on TikTok every so often. I see you
Yeah.
tagging me and stuff.
Hmm.
Um, And so thank you, Ellie. And for anyone else, I'm Nick Perro, Sick of This Shit Publications. You guys see me a lot and get to hang out with me a lot. I appreciate everyone. Um, please come and join both of us. And then finally, Banner and Backbone, the network that makes this possible, is our network. It's people powered. We're bringing everything for everyone. And we got to experience a new update on Substack today that let us group ourselves into a single stream chat on Substack where you got all of our names together again, like it used to be, but we're doing it through Restream. Um, and I cannot wait to try this for Friday for our anti fascist book club to see how many we can get into a single stream. Um,
I got my T-shirt in the mail, so there you go.
awesome. I'll make sure I'm going to add you because I am now up to 5 co-hosts that I'm
Yeah, I may
inviting
or
for
may not. I
this.
will try to be in it. I Our Friday is this
Yeah,
week is
we'll
just
see.
crazy. So yeah,
If we can't get you, Ellie, we don't. And if we do, we do. We'll see what
sure.
happens. This will be a lot of fun to try out and see what goes on. So look out for Friday, everyone. And then we'll see you next week for another episode of Powerful Voices, Wednesday at 4 p.m. Eastern. We get to talk to Ellie Leonard and hopefully Zev Shalev on off and on times. And bring truth to power and reveal the powerful voices that need to be heard. So thank you, Ellie. Thank you,
Thank you.
everyone in the chat with us today. And we will talk again soon. Bye, y'all. Have a great day.
Bye.